Hi guys. Full house tonight. It's the first time in summer we've actually had a full-ish room, which is great. I'm super excited. Summer is usually a time where you guys are all like at the beach and stuff, so I'm glad you're here. We've been in Genesis for a good little bit, so if you want to get ahead, it's your chance to turn to Genesis chapter 16 now. If you don't have a Bible, we have Bibles in the back. You're welcome to borrow. If you don't have one at all, you can take it home. It's yours. If you know someone that doesn't have a Bible, we'd like them to have a Bible, and you can tell them to work through it with them and answer any questions they have. They're also in the back. Again, they're free. If you need one, take one. Bibles are like moving buddies. If you don't have one, get one. Toy Story. I have to clarify my references, and some of you don't know. So tonight, Toy Story. Did you just get that? That's like 10 seconds later, Amy gets a joke. If you hear a late laugh, it's because Amy just realized that it was a joke. We don't say last names here for fear the people on the web will find out who you are. Anyway, so what we've done is walked through the beginning from creation at its beginning point in Genesis. We are now at a wonderful, horrible story about Sarah and Hagar and Abram and Ishmael, and we're going to talk about it tonight. But we walked through the creation, so we walked from nothing but God, to God creates everything. We had a beautiful marriage ceremony at the end, the garden with Adam and Eve. In the next chapter, everything goes to pieces, and they fall from the state of perfection they were created in. And then from there, we move on to the Noah, the flood, everybody dies. Again, we seem to keep getting it wrong, but God keeps reaching down, speaking to people with gospel, with grace, and bringing people to himself. And we walk through the Tower of Babel. We come to Abram who was called out of Babylon. All right, so he was literally a pagan man worshiping a pagan god, called by God personally to come to a land he had no idea where it was, okay, and settle there and have that land as a promise. All right, so we walked from that. We saw Abram, who he gets it. Sometimes his faith is really strong, sometimes his faith just isn't even there, right? It's like he misses his point. So like we saw him, famine came to the land that God had him settle in, and he goes down to Egypt, down like you would go down to a bad place. He goes down to Egypt, and that's actually where our starting point for Genesis 16 is going to be, even though that was back in chapter 13. All right? So we're going to have to jump back and go to the first point. And we're going to see that when you're in Genesis chapter 16, verse 1, we're going to read it, but it actually is going to go back all the way. You can go to the first point, or I'm going to keep talking about myself, to Genesis chapter 12, verse 20. 16:1 says this. I hope you're there. You've had plenty of time. I rambled. All right? And I'll ramble again. But first, Genesis 16:1 says this. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. All right, so again, we're going to go back to Genesis 12:20. Any of you, who has Genesis 12:20? Because any of you really advantageous? Go ahead, Bill. What's Genesis 12:20 tell us?
So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had.
All right, so all this stuff, a lot of the stuff that Abram had gotten, actually came from Egypt. All right, so when he went down there foolishly trying to run from famine in the land that God was going to give him, he ran to Egypt that seemed to have stuff. Now on his way there, he had this great idea, because evidently Sarah, who's although 75, is really smoking hot, and he didn't want the Egyptians to kill him and take his wife, so he's like, hey, just tell them you're my sister, and that'll work out well for me, because then they'll like me, and then you'll get to sleep with Pharaoh. It was a bad idea, okay? It was holistically a bad idea. And from that, though, we see that he was given lots of stuff. Whatever you like, just pretend you got that. Xbox, Escalade, I don't know what you're looking for, but he got lots of stuff from Pharaoh, literally giving him stuff, all right? And Pharaoh, and God strikes his house with a plague, and we don't know exactly what the plague is, but Pharaoh is so messed up from that whole situation that instead of taking anything back, he's like, look, whoever is on your side is trumping me big time. Just take all the stuff and get out. So when he leaves Egypt in Genesis chapter 12, he goes back to the promised land where he should never have left in the first place with, a really long ride with a really angry wife. Okay, right? When you try to pimp out your wife, it's not going to go well. And that's a long journey by camel. Okay, so he goes back to the promised land with a lot of stuff from Egypt. One of those things we find out in Genesis chapter 16, verse 1 is who? Hagar, right? Hagar is an Egyptian from chapter 12. And we're going to see that this whole process of things that he got is not just, although it seems like it was a blessing, it ends up being a continual hindrance to the things that God was trying to work out, because it wasn't part of faith on Abraham's part. It was part of his own earthly way of dealing with problems. All right. So the first thing you need to know is Genesis chapter 16 starts back in Genesis chapter 12. Hagar is from Egypt. All right? So that's part of the possessions he took back with him when Pharaoh was like, look, get out of here. I can't handle this. Your God trumps me every day of the week, so just go. And that's how we get Hagar. Now, why does that matter? Maybe we should read more so we can find out. Because this is going to be a problem, all right? And the reason tonight our title is Redeeming a Perfectly Horrible Plan is because this is a really great, horrible idea that's about to happen, all right? Sarah, ladies, you're just as evil as men. Just make sure we're very clear on that. We are an equal opportunity offender here at Missio Day Church because the Bible is very clear that it too is an equal opportunity offender, okay? When you sin, you go against God, there's a problem. Ladies, you're not off the hook. In fact, tonight you get to be on the hook because both the ladies tonight are going to do not well. All right, so the perfect horrible plan, we're going to find out that is 2:4. We'll stop at the first part of 4. We're not going to read the whole thing, so be ready to stop. Verse 2 starts like this. And Sarah said to Abram, all right, now remember, God promised in the covenant she was going to have a bunch of kids, all right? And she has no kids in verse 1. So verse 2 starts this way. Sarah said to Abram, behold, now the Lord, and this is never good, never blame. It's just not good. The Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarah. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. That's a bad idea. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she conceived, we'll stop. Just stop there. She conceived. So here's the horrible idea, right? Now this is what I want you to know is actually a common custom back then. It was a common practice, all right? So if you were unable to have children as the wife, it was a common practice, and it's a horrible idea, by the way, in the culture to take the maidservant, your servant, and let your husband sleep with her, and then she might get pregnant and have a child, and if the husband recognized that child as the heir, then it became your child as the wife. Is that confusing? A little bit? It's a horrible idea, right? And we have a couple of problems here, right? One, Sarah blames God because she has no children, and it's God's fault, right? So it's God's fault that she can't have children, but God has promised that she's going to have children. So maybe she should have exercised faith there and understood that God does exactly what he wills, and since he saved her in Pharaoh's palace, prior to her, being defiled by Pharaoh because she was married to Abram because her husband had a horrible idea to lie, he sends a plague to Pharaoh, all right? So Sarah is not void of understanding that God does supernatural, miraculous, amazing things. Sarah knows this, all right? But instead, she's like, no, God's made me barren, all right? So I've got an idea, right? I say, you take my young, very attractive Egyptian maidservant, and you have sex with her, and maybe you'll have a baby that way. And Abram, right, the good, upstanding pillar of the faith, says, no, that's a horrible idea. I would never do that. God has promised that through you we'll have a baby. No, he doesn't. Dirty old Abram's like, oh, you want me to have sex with a young girl? I'm down. If this is good for the family, if this is what you think will be best, that's what, I'll take it on the chin. I'll just buckle down and do this, Sarah, for you. Right? Great guy. He's a great guy, Abram. And this is where you see sometimes Abram really gets it. And he's repentant and he's remorseful and he's establishing altars and he's worshiping God and he's calling people around him as a great evangelist, speaking the words of God. And then there's times just like us where Abram, this man who is mentioned, so many times in the Bible next to the word faith, just drops the ball. And here he drops the ball. And he's like, oh, this is a great idea. Trade in my, attractive but 85-year-old wife for a, very attractive and younger model. That's what I'll do. Okay, let's have a baby, right? So they do whatever you do to have a baby. I don't know exactly how that works. But they do that, and Hagar gets pregnant. And what you see here is that Sarah's plan worked perfectly, right? This plan was spot on, right? Literally, they achieved everything they wanted from this plan. There is a child. She is pregnant. Good job, Sarah, right? Way to go. No. Bad idea. And that's why that whole idea is about redeeming this perfectly horrible plan that Sarah's going to contrive, that Abram's totally going to listen, right? It says he listened to the voice of Sarah, right? And he follows this plan, right? And then you sit there, and right now you're thinking, this Hagar girl, it's so sad. She's an Egyptian slave, she's given to Abram, goes all the way away from her home and people, and now they force her into the situation where she's got to have a baby, right? And you feel sorry for Hagar right now. And that's okay, you can feel sorry for Hagar right now, but then we're going to read the next couple of verses and you can stop feeling sorry for Hagar. All right, so the next point, we're just going to keep walking through this. And I'm going to try to be, this is my favorite point. The Ishmael hits the fan. I like this point personally. I made a little play on the words there with Ishmael. Anyway. What we're going to read here now is what's going to be resultant. Okay, we're going to see Hagar kind of change. We're going to see this development kind of happen. And remember, we're walking towards a point where this is going to be redeemed. This whole horrible idea is going to be redeemed. All right, so let's see what this Ishmael is going to happen here. All right, so let's talk at the end of verse 4. Remember, we stopped off. All right, verse 4, they went into Hagar, she conceived. All right, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. It's important to note there. She looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarah said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you." This is awesome. "What have you done to me, Abram? May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." What a wonderful woman Sarah is. But Abram said to Sarah, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarah dealt harshly with her, Hagar, and she fled from her. All right, so here's what goes down, in case you didn't catch it. All right, this is like a regular old good episode of Desperate Housewives. All right, so she sends Hagar in. Hagar gets pregnant, and the first thing Hagar does, you felt sorry for her, right? But Hagar, the gold digger, is like, wait a second, I have Abram's baby. Let me totally like reverse roles here, right? "Oh, Sarah, you couldn't have a baby? Oh, you know what? I could use something to drink though, because I'm pregnant. No, it's hot in here. Abram, could you send Sarah to go get something? Maybe she can get me some grapes or dates." I don't know what they ate back then. They're in the Middle East. Dates. And they ate figs, right? "Oh, could you? Maybe she could fan me for a little bit. It's really hot in here, Abram. This baby is so heavy. I really feel sick. Sarah, could you hold my hair back?" Right? Do you see how the contempt comes into play? Right? And that's what Hagar automatically starts doing to Sarah. Now God said, "Abram, you're going to have a lot of kids through Sarah." All right? This is what God tells Abram. This horrible plan goes down, and now Hagar steps right in as the wonderful savior that she is to get Sarah out of the way. She's like, "Wait a second, he's got a lot of stuff. I've got his baby. We can make this work." Right? That's what Hagar says. And so you see that this wonderful idea by Sarah is really going to grab quick. And that's what's happening. And that's how it works with us, right? We think that we have these ideas that are so good, so we're going to put them in play over God instead of having faith, understanding who God is. Right? And we doubt His Word. And pretty much this is exactly what happens with sin, right? You know, Adam and Eve, right? Same thing happened. You know, they thought their plan was going to be better than God's. Don't eat the fruit. Okay, we won't eat the fruit. We'll learn from you, right? And this is the understanding God was going to walk with them and teach them and instruct them, and they were to grow in this understanding and knowledge by personal interaction with God. And instead, they see this quick shortcut. No, when you eat this fruit, you're going to be like God. You're going to know as He does. Oh, shortcut to God's plan. We can make that happen, right? We know how that turns out. Turns out really well for us. Right? Everything you do works really well. No, it doesn't, because Adam and Eve decided they had a better way, and now everything you do wars against you. I wanted to mow my lawn today. I wanted to mow my lawn. Now, I'm pretty fast at mowing lawns. I'm just quick. I've done it a long time. I don't know if it's a good skill to have, but I can cut grass pretty quick. All right, so I go out. I wake up early. Right? I planned ahead. I woke up early because it's going to be hot. And I said, if I get out there early, it's not going to be as hot. It's a good idea, right? Good plan. So I go out, I go to start up my mower, it doesn't start. Well, you should know that I've rigged my mower so that it still works. The mower's about 18 years old, right? So I've rigged it so my throttle cable is actually wrapped around this bolt, right, to make the throttle go up. For you ladies, that's when you would press on the gas, okay, makes the engine go hotter. So I actually have to pull on this wire, wrap it around this bolt to make the RPMs go up on the mower, all right? So it wasn't starting, so I knew that I had to, put it back down into a lower throttle, so I have to unwind it off the bolt and let the throttle cable go back down so that it's a lower RPM, so that I know I can start it. I go to do that, my little rigging system snaps. So now I have to reattach my throttle wire, right? And you say, oh good, well there's some time, I've lost some time on that. Let's say I lost half an hour trying to reattach my throttle cable and get my mower started. Finally I get it started, right? First pass around the outside of my yard, right? About 3/4 of the way around my yard. For those of you who see my house, down along the street, around that little bed, coming up to my walkway, front left wheel falls off my mower. It just falls right off. I remember vividly because my wife was letting my son come out of the front door, and I just look at her like, no. She's like, what? Like, the wheels off my mower. Throttle cable broke, wheels off my mower. Woke up early so it wouldn't be hot. It's been shady this whole time, and now as the wheel falls off, the sun comes out. Right? Thank you, Adam and Eve. So now I get some I get some liquid wrench, which is like a lubricant, so the wheel spins, because obviously there's some sort of something going on there. Put that on there, reattach my wheel, and I'm on my yard, right? Long story short, it was really hot by the time I started on my yard, as I wasted an hour trying to get my mower to work. Right? We lay out these, and you know what? I should have just cursed God. But I didn't, because really it was, just the way things work. The curse happens, and God seeks to redeem it. So instead I sucked it up and mowed my yard because, for the glory of God, I wanted my house to be taken care of, right? It's kind of how it has to work. Stuff wars against us. That's how the curse goes. And so we constantly try to usurp God. We lay our plans out the way we want them to, and he says, I've got something different for you. Justin, you probably need to work on your patience. So we did. I think I did okay. I wasn't really too angry. Right? Did I react to it? No. Okay, good. My wife's, she's saying in agreement that I did not sin much. And that's what you need to understand. So this is the whole Sarah plan against God's plan. God says, I'm going to give you a baby. Sarah says, no, I got a better idea. This is taking too long. It's been 10 years. I don't have time for this. Hagar, we get it done. Now Hagar's saying, look, I'm going to cut you right out, lady. I got the baby. You don't. Your wound's all dried up. Mine seems to be just fine. Maybe you should probably find another place to live. That's what Hagar's doing. All right? And we see that Abram, being the good leader he is, right? Sarah comes to him. Now, look, ladies, I just want to touch on this real quick. You can really communicate well, or you can communicate really poorly. And I know this is true of guys too, all right? When's the last time you saw another guy nag another guy? You ever see that happen? You ever see two guys just nagging each other? No, that doesn't happen because one of the guys dies. That's what happens when that happens. That's not how it works. But sometimes, ladies, you can lean really hard into a guy over and over and just like needle and just get upset, and then, to top it all off, you cry, and we don't know what to do with that, so we just acquiesce to whatever you're asking. All right? It's like, great, now she's crying. I can't fight that. What am I going to do? Make her cry more? I can't win. I can't win that fight. So, special note, ladies, there's a good way to communicate that can actually get a man to respond both emotionally and spiritually, and not just acquiesce in behavior, all right, and not just give you what you want because they can't deal with it. Instead, learning to grow in relationship, communicating clearly and honestly. These are pictures in the Bible of how we actually interact with each other. Saying that, Sarah's like, Abram, it's such a horrible idea. How could you do this to me? Look what you've done to me. Look what Hagar's doing to me. Why does she sound like that? I don't know. But do you see how Sarah comes in and says, look what you have done. It's God's fault. It's your fault. Now Hagar's cutting me out. What are you going to do about it, Abram? And now great Abram leads really well and says, look, I don't know what you just do it. She's your servant. Whatever you got to do. I'm done. Just don't stop yelling. Stop screaming. I'm sure it's my fault. Whatever. Your servant. Just do what you got to do. I don't want to hear about it anymore. Right? Good leader, Abram. Way to go. All right. So we see that Sarah, Hagar, and Abram, really in this story, they have a great plan that works out really horribly for everyone. No one is going to be happy. All right. Sarah is now unhappy. All right. Her plan is crumbling around her. Abram is definitely now unhappy. Right. He's gotten yelled at. He thought he was doing this great service for his wife. Horrible man he was. All right. And in this, I want you to know, this is where we sit. All right. In a second, the story is going to change. And it's going to change because someone's going to step in to fix the story. But this is where we sit. We sit right here, having a horrible plan like Sarah that turns out exactly like it's supposed to. Our plans work perfectly. We plan ahead to sin, right? We don't plan ahead to not sin, right? So we actually work our day out so that we can, make sure that at the end of the day we're going to talk to that person and gossip about everybody else. We plan ahead so that we have extra time to gamble, watch porn, do drugs. We organize our sin. Or worse yet, we know that we might be in a tense situation. Instead of planning ahead to be calm and react properly, we actually don't plan ahead and we actually look to defend ourselves ahead of time, right? So we're constantly either planning or not planning to sin. And that's where we land. And then our plans go perfectly, just like we thought they would. And again, God has to step in to redeem our plans. And even the things that we mean for evil, just like we'll see when Joseph interacts, right? And he gets sold. Ironically, Joseph gets sold to who? Anybody know? A little bit of Bible trivia. Joseph is like lots of brothers, and they're really pissed off at him, and then they sent Ishmaelites. Whoa, Ishmaelites. See, it's connected. All right, just saying it's connected. Anyway, but just like Joseph says, what you meant for evil, God is used for good. That's exactly how God steps in and works things out. So let's continue down this road. We're still in Genesis 16. We haven't gone anywhere else yet. All right. So the Ishmael hits the fan, and we see it goes really poorly. Our next point is going to be how this is going to start to turn and enter the Redeemer. Right. Someone's going to step in and change this process. This horrible plan is working exactly like it should. Now everyone is gone. Hagar is leaving. Right. Where do you think Hagar's going to head? If you didn't read ahead, or if you did read ahead. Hagar is what nationality she is. So where do you think she's going to go? Egypt. You guys are geniuses. This is great. Verse 7, we'll pick it up. The angel of the Lord, it's a very special title in the scriptures, bound her, Hagar, by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarah, where have you come from and where are you going? She says, I am fleeing from my mistress Sarah. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring, so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael. I didn't make it up. It comes from the Bible. Because the Lord has listened to your affliction. Special note, this is what Ishmael means. Because the Lord has listened to your afflictions. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. Verse 13, so she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, you are a God of seeing, or a God who sees my afflictions. For she said, truly here I have seen him who looks after me. Therefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. I don't know how to say it, but I said it fast. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. All right, so that word there that I can't pronounce, it actually is going to go back and mean it. You are a God who sees me in my afflictions. All right, you are a God of seeing. Verse 15, and Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael, which means God has listened to my affliction. So God has heard. All right, this is literally what Abram calls him. Ishmael, God has heard. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. All right, let's talk about it, right? This title, the angel of the Lord, is different than the title, an angel of the Lord. All right? And while not everyone agrees, there is a good contingency of those that would understand. There's really smart people that have gone to school for 25 years and understand the word really well, that the angel of the Lord would be what's called a Christophany, or the appearance of Christ prior to his incarnation. Right? This is literally how Jesus would step in and communicate. And you can see that in this interaction here. It's not just a normal angel, right? Because Hagar is not communicating in a way that she would communicate to a normal angel. For example, to an angel, you don't say, let's find it. Truly, here I have seen him who looks after me, right? That's not something you say to an angel. Angels aren't overseeing all of your works, okay? There are some angels that are put here to look over certain things. I want you to know that they do exist. Angels aren't fictional, they actually are very real. But you don't say that, hey, you are the sovereign one to an angel, right? No, they're not. God is sovereign. He's the one that looks over everything we do, steps in our moments of need, right? What else? So this angel actually receives praise. That's an interesting thing, right? Angels aren't to receive praise. In fact, angels directly know and understand that they should give praise right back to God. That's exactly, they're going to reflect it right back, right? That's how this works. So this is the angel of the Lord. This is actually Jesus Christ coming down. Now he comes down to a woman who he knows is broken. right? At this point, gold digging Hagar is actually bummed out of the home. She's literally, I don't know how that works, but you know it gets bad, ladies, right? Right? Guys get angry, they fight, they move on, and they're best friends again, right? Ladies, you do something different. You interact differently, you communicate differently, you're uniquely different than guys. Guys are totally different than girls. I don't know if you noticed this or not. You know, girls are pretty, guys are not, right? You know, girls are delicate. You're supposed to be, by the way. The Bible says so. Guys are not, right? And that's a classic, understanding that, girls are beautiful wine vessels. Which beautiful glasses that you can put wine in. I like the little stemless ones that, that kind of like look like they're just balancing there on nothing. And guys are more like thermoses, right? You just take them to work, you beat the snot out of them, you bring them back, and they do the same thing they're supposed to do. They're fine, right? You can just put hot stuff in them, you can put cold stuff in them, it doesn't matter, right? You're not going to put them out, though, when you have guests over, right? It's not like, oh, the president's coming, let's get our thermoses out. No, you don't do that. You got the beautiful, awesome wine glasses, right? And that's the understanding that ladies are different than guys. However, because guys are thermoses, they just beat each other up when they have a problem, and then someone wins and someone loses, and in the end, though, they're still okay, right? It's like, okay, we got through that. Good job, high five, let's go get something to eat. Ladies, for some reason, you really just dig. So something Hagar, you know it's got to be bad, right? Hagar's got the child, right? She's working this plan with Abram. And Sarah just turns the tables on her. So I don't know how horrible it got, but ladies, you know it can get bad, right? Think of that person that used to be your best friend that now you don't even talk to each other, and if you saw, you would wish death upon them. And then repent and change your heart, because you shouldn't do that, right? But that's how this got. I don't know, pulling hair, name calling, I don't know how it got. Look, what? All right? It got bad. And Hagar's on the run. So this great plan she had is just totally gone. And now this broken woman, pregnant woman, leaves. Now what does Hagar have? Does she have a lot of stuff? Does she have a lot of stuff? What is Hagar? A slave, a servant, right? So does she have a lot of stuff? No. But it's gotten so bad that she's like, forget this, I'm out. I'm just going to go back to Egypt. It's got to be better than this horrible mess. In the wilderness, with a pregnant stomach, with a child, God comes to her. That's how God works, right? God comes to us, even though we've put ourselves in the exact spot we are. Literally, Hagar has made her bed. Just let her lie in it, right? She deserves it. No. God steps in. And when he steps into her, he asks questions. You always make a note when God asks questions, right? Does God need to ask questions? Does he need to ask questions? No. Because God knows everything, right? Doesn't need to know information. We're not going to give him some new particulate of information that's going to suddenly eliminate him to some sort of truth. God knows. Right? So when God steps in and says, where are you coming from, where are you going, it's not like he doesn't know. But he's entering into a relationship and giving a chance for Hagar to communicate with him. That's just how he works with us. That's how he works with everyone. He steps into relationship with us. Comes down, right, from glory to enter into relationship with us. And he says to Hagar, where are you coming from? Where are you going? What's up? You're pregnant and you're in the middle of the wilderness on your way to Egypt. That's a bad idea, right? That doesn't sound like a good idea. You should walk in the hot, nasty weather back to another country with a baby in your stomach. Just FYI, they don't recommend that, right? They recommend that you limit exercise if you're pregnant, okay? And you intake more calories, okay? Because you have a baby. They don't recommend you take long hikes to other countries in the heat. So he steps in and says, where are you coming from and where are you going? And not only does he step in and ask this question, he doesn't need to ask, but then he's going to comfort her with an understanding. Now, he tells her to go back, right? What does she have if she goes back? Let's just think, what are some things she has that she doesn't have currently in the wilderness by herself that she does if she goes back to Abram's house? A shelter, food, right? Two big things when you're pregnant. Someplace to be and live and something to eat, right? God knows that. This is not a foolish thing, this is a wise thing. And you see that as God's going to turn this around, everything he's going to turn around is telling people exactly what they should have done in the first place. All the way to the name of Ishmael. It's everything they should have done in the first place. And so he takes what's wrong and sets it right. That's literally how redeeming is. It's taking it from the thing that it's been into and takes it for what it should be for, right? The idea of redemption is buying someone back out of slavery and actually releasing them into freedom. This idea that you give something that had no meaning or a different meaning back into what it should mean. And that's just a beautiful picture of what God does in redemption. Jesus steps into redemption and says, go back. Go back. You're about to go to Egypt as a pregnant slave woman. I don't care if you make it there or not with a baby. That's just not a good situation to step into. Right? No one's marrying you. You're going to have this baby. It's likely that the baby may or may not live. This is just not a good situation. You need to go back. And then not only does that, but he tells her that he will actually give her lineage to her son. Now Ishmael is going to be a wild donkey of a man. Right? So he's like, by the way, this child is going to be rough. Right? That's putting it mildly. This is going to be a difficult one. Literally, this child is going to be offset against everyone else. Right? He's like, it's like Mary by contrary. Everything that everybody else wants to do, he's going to be contrary to it. It's exactly what this child's going to do. And Ishmael's going to be against those that are around him, right? And Ishmael actually would be the father of what we understand of the Arab nation, all right? So the line of the Arab nation flows back to Ishmael. And this is where you see Abram being at the center point of so many different cultures and peoples, right? Literally, God is making peoples from Abram. So the whole Arab world looks back to Ishmael, all right? Whose father is Abram. The Arab people, okay, go through to the understanding of religion of Muslim. Now, not entirely, but predominantly, all right? And so who are the Muslims directly opposed to? The Jews. The Jewish people trace their line back through Israel, all right? Through the son of promise, whose name is Isaac. We'll get to him soon, all right? Whose father is Abraham. So we got two I's, Isaac and Ishmael, all right? Ishmael goes all the way through the Muslims, and then the Jews would point all the way back to Isaac. And do they have a good relationship? No. They have a pretty rough one, right? A lot of bloodshed over a lot of years. Pretty rough. Points back to the great idea by Sarah to have Hagar sleep with Abram, the wonderfully upstanding man Abram, saying, no, this is a bad idea. But he doesn't do that. Instead, he sleeps with Hagar. We have Ishmael. We have wars for centuries. See? And you guys thought you were just going to have a good time. You don't know where your plans are going to end up. I'm sure Abram's thought as he was going in to be with Hagar was not, this may set up centuries of warring between the son of promise and an offspring that's not of promise. Probably not. No. He was thinking, my wife's a sucker. That's what he was thinking. And I'm a horrible man. He wasn't thinking that, but he did think of that in the morning, I'm sure. Right? And so we have Muslims and Jews warring against each other because Sarah had a great idea. Abram wasn't man enough to stand up for it, and Hagar thought she could get in on some sort of slick action here and get a home and a husband. But God steps in, and he says, Hagar, go back where you have a home, where you have food. All right? Tell Abram to name the son Ishmael, which means God hears. All right? So a continual reminder for Abram, right, is that his firstborn son, illegitimate, not child of promise, is named God hears. Like, don't you know? Did you think I wasn't understanding you were in affliction? Do you think I know it wasn't frustrating for you to be barren? Right? Right, Sarah? You know, I knew you didn't have any children yet. Because I'm God. And I hear you. And when you struggle and when you are hurt, I hear you. And that's the name of his firstborn illegitimate son, Ishmael. A continual reminder. A continual calling Abram and Sarah back to himself. I hear, I know. I haven't stopped being God. I still love you. You're still going to have exactly the promise that I have. I can not stop being myself. I cannot stop loving you. I cannot stop reaching into your hearts. I know that you're barren. I know you have no children, and that's frustrating. But I got a plan. And that's why you hear it so clearly in Ishmael, just the name, that the pagan Egypt lady, all right, first of all, it's got to be frustrating to have, imagine Sarah having finally gotten that Hagar out of her house, having Hagar come back in a very repentant and understanding attitude, having had an interaction with the Christ, right? She comes back and says, I should never have done this. This isn't how it gone. Sarah, I shouldn't have done that with you. I'm here to serve you, right? That's what I'm here to do. And God says to name the child Ishmael. I'm sure that was probably not frustrating to Sarah at all. Oh yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. Right. You can be. You can come back in the house. We'll care for this. I shouldn't have done it. Right? Abram, you're going to name your son Ishmael, which means, by the way, God hears you and he knows exactly what you're feeling. And Jesus puts the situation back to where it should have been. He steps in and takes the horrible plan that was going absolutely horrible places right back the way it should be. He's going to give a line. Why would God, in his divine plan, allow something like this to happen? Because he's a good, gracious, loving God. Even today, there are people that exist on this planet that should not, because God is a gracious and patient God, and he desires for more people to come to know that he is a loving and gracious and patient God, right? That's exactly why he has not come and poured out judgment. Because he's loving and patient. That's why Hagar gets a lineage. She's going to be cared for, taken care of. Her son is going to have children. They're going to father a nation. And that nation is going to be a hard time for God's people, God's chosen people. Right? Let's see, what else did I not cover from there? So Jesus steps in and sets it straight. It's an interesting thing to see. Now, Jesus interacts with ladies. All right, Leah, and I don't know if you know the story of Jacob and Leah. Ultimately, who does Jacob really want to marry? Who? What? Rachel, right? He gets Leah. I don't know, Leah, she wasn't as attractive as Rachel, right? And he works all this time to get Rachel, gets Leah. Okay, Leah has 2 children. Everybody know what their names are? Ooh, this is a tough one. This isn't fair. You can't just ask random Bible theology questions like this. Reuben? What? Simeon, good. Their names happen to mean that God hears and sees, all right? So God hears was Ishmael, and the name of the place is God sees me in my afflictions, right? And just like Hagar has this interaction with God, Leah, okay, this girl that evidently nobody wanted, understands when Jacob is still going to work for Rachel, right? He's going to move right past Leah, right? He's going to have children with her, and Leah seems like this lady that's off-cast. God steps in. She names her children Reuben and Simeon because she knows that God hears and God sees. Take that, fast forward that, we're going to jump out of the Old Testament, all right? So turn in your Bibles to John, all right? You can go to the next point, by the way. There you go. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, John 4. John 4, 7 through 28. It's a big, long passage. We're not going to read it all, but just so you know that I'm there, all right? What's it titled? Is there a little like, caption above that for you guys? Should be, a little caption. Anyone? No? Jesus and the woman of Samaria. So you guys know the story of the Samaritan woman? If you don't, I'm going to tell you, so it's okay. Jesus comes to this well in the middle of the day, all right? Remember how I was going to mow the yard in the beginning of the day? Because it wasn't as, what? Hot. Yeah, you don't come, just like that, you don't come to the well in the middle of the day because it's, what? Hot, right? You go get your water in the beginning of the day when it's cool because you're not going to carry 15-gallon things on your shoulders, heads, arms, feet, all the way back to your house when it's hot. So why is a Samaritan woman coming in the middle of the day? Anybody?
Because she was an outcast.
Because she was an outcast, right? Why was she an outcast? Because she what? Because she was pretty much a whore, right? Yeah, she was pretty much a whore. The Samaritan woman comes in the middle of the day so she doesn't have to suffer the shame of the other women looking at her, jeering and sneering. Jesus is walking, okay, he tends to do that a lot in his public ministry. He tends to be walking quite a bit. He's walking, he stops at this well, all right? First of all, the Samaritans and Jews don't get along well. The Samaritans are half-breed Jews. They're not completely full-bred Jews. It's not like they have Jewish, they point back in heritage, Jewish mom, Jewish dad. They point back to the Jews mingling with all the ites, okay? So they have this mingled kind of blood, and that's where you have the Samaritans. Right? The Jews didn't want anything to do with it. Now, Jesus is Jewish. And he's going to speak to, one, a woman, two, a Samaritan woman. Ladies, I'm not trying to downplay you, but culturally back then you have to understand men traditionally interacted with men, all right? What Jesus does is give an understanding and an equality and a value to women that has never before been seen in culture. I don't know if you knew that, but because he knows that you were created in the image of God, he gives that to you, all right? Steps into this harlot woman, all right? And he just starts talking to her about water. He says, can I have a drink? I'm thirsty, I need a drink. She's like, oh, well, he doesn't have a bucket. Maybe I should give him something to drink. And then he talks to her about living water, right? This water that I can give you so that you'll never thirst again. She's thinking, that's a great idea. I'll never have to come to this well again and suffer that pain and shame of people looking down upon me. He's like, first you get your husband, and that's the problem, right? Because she's been with like 5 or 6 dudes and she doesn't even know who to bring to the well. He's like, look, I know that. You don't have to answer me. I know that you have that. But what I want you to know is I am here as the Messiah come to save you and redeem you from that. Right? And what she does, she goes back and tells everybody. And then he spends some time teaching the Samaritans to understand that he is the one, the Messiah. He's our Savior King. And we see that Jesus is always, he's constantly stepping into these broken situations, and he particularly likes to give value back to the ladies, right? And despite the fact that ladies have, you sometimes have bad plans, just like guys do, right? Despite that, he wants to give back to you value, and he wants to bring about redemption in your lives. How cool is that? I mean, the disciples get there and they're like, Jesus, what are you doing talking to a woman? First of all, maybe you're just hungry. You should probably eat. That's what they say, right? Like, Jesus at some house had some sort of, crazy starvation issue that he's talking to the Samaritan woman. You should just eat something, Jesus. Maybe you should lay down, right? And Jesus is like, look, dude, I eat stuff that you have no idea about, right? I'm doing ministry. Ministry is food for me. I love this woman. I'm going to bring about change and redemption. And that's what he does. He then steps in. We know that he ends up going to the cross and dying. And in Matthew 28, he comes back, right? And he appears to his disciples and he lets them know that everything I've taught you, right, you take and make disciples with. Go and make disciples. Take this gospel that I've given you and go and give it. I came to redeem, you go and redeem. And we see that Jesus has been about this since the beginning of Genesis. And every week he's stepping in and speaking to someone, calling someone to himself, despite the fact that they have nothing of value or worth to give to him. I love you so much. Please, please come to me. Right? I will take the horrible mess you've made and I will make it right. And that's where we understand that Jesus came to redeem and he calls us to follow him in that, right? I have come, I've lived, I've died. Jesus Christ came down from heaven, all right? The biggest missionary experience ever for anyone, right? The culture of heaven where you're God and glorified, right, down to man, where you get scrapes and bruises and you cry and someone has to change your diaper. You can find somebody that's had a harder missionary cultural shock, and you can't. You just can't do it, right? God worshipped to man in a diaper. He comes down off that throne, comes down to a place where people are going to constantly reject him, but for the sake of some that will follow him, he then dies for the salvation of the world. Literally, his blood is our atoning sacrifice, right? He takes the burden of sin, the guilt, the shame that we should have borne on himself, goes to the cross, dies, gets put in the tomb, but doesn't stay in the tomb. He rises and lives again 3 days later. At that point, there is nothing that death can do for those that have accepted his payment. There is nothing that sin can bring about that will cause more shame or guilt for them, because Jesus has taken it, conquered it, and rises victorious over it. That's what Jesus does. And then he says, take this gift, give it to everybody else. And that's where we find ourselves. He reaches back into Hagar, gives her hope, gives her heritage, puts her back into a place where she's cared for, letting Sarah and Abram know full well that he hears and sees them and knows that they're struggling and in pain, and calls them to himself to instead be faithful. You don't see Sarah again trying to usurp God in her barrenness. You do see her laugh. She kind of gets it, kind of doesn't. It's broken people that God uses to bring about his glory. That's where we are. And as broken people, we get to be callers. Callers to God. Callers pointing right back to Jesus. And enter into that redemption process. So as we walk into our time of response, take a couple minutes. I really want you to ponder and think, all right? We're gonna step into singing in a minute or two, but I want you to ponder and think about the fact that Jesus is reaching into broken people and changing them. And then he calls you, if God has reached into your life and changed you, if you understand Christ, what he's done, who he is, right? And if you don't, by the way, I'd love to talk to you later. But if you realize that, he then calls you to go and take that news and give it, right? Just like the church is a similar form, just like the church is a similar form of the ark, right? We are in here literally tonight, but we are not supposed to be in here forever. We're supposed to go out of the ark. We can literally walk into a dying world and give them the salvation that they need to understand. That's why we do things like the marketplace. That's why we don't have a building with a spire. That's why we're not aiming at a mortgage that will suck all of our money away from ministry. We instead want to pour into the community. We'll go to the marketplace. We're going to talk about Jesus to a lot of people on purpose. And so as you respond, think about those ways in which you can now call to redemption the people around you, at work, at home, right? If you're in college, at school, right? How can you interact? And they're going to be hard interactions. It's not easy for Hagar to walk back into camp. But hard interactions that lead to repentance and salvation and change is awesome. And there'll be hard conversations that you get to have with a lot of people that you love, that you care about, people that you barely know. But when you look to be a redeemer like Jesus, that's how it goes. So pray for those interactions. Pray that you would have those interactions. If there's people that you know you need to be having these kinds of interactions with, pray about them specifically. Talk to God, call out to him, and say, look, I don't know how I'm going to do this like we talked about last week. I have faith that you're God and that you will do these things, but I don't know how. But this is the person. I love them. I care about them. You know I'll interact with them here, and here this week. Help me to be a redeemer in those situations. All right, so as the musicians come up, we'll get ready to play one song to kind of wrap us out. Spend some time talking with God, the loving God, who reaches down into Hagar's life to point Sarah and Abram back to himself. Right? Who comes down on the cross after he's lived a life that we never live. So we fail every day. He dies a death that we deserve instead to be dying. Rises again, conquers sin for us to be able to live differently. Spend some time with God, and then join us and sing loud, because that God has loved you enough to save you.